I forgot to tell my son I had called a technician to fix the security camera. That small memory slip should have been a simple mistake. Instead, it saved my life. When I accidentally checked the footage, I did not see a happy family. I saw my daughter-in-law swapping my sick wife's medication for poison while my son stood guard. 10 minutes later, they walked into my room smiling. If you are watching this, take a deep breath. Because what happened next isn't just a family dispute. It is a crime scene. My name is Harold Sullivan. I am 70 years old, and I have spent 40 of those years building bridges across the roughest rivers in Washington state. I know how to spot a structural fracture before the concrete even cracks. But I never saw the fracture in my own home until last Tuesday night. Before I tell you how I survived the night that was supposed to be my last, please subscribe to the channel. It helps me share this warning with other parents who might be blind to the truth. And tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are watching from? I am reading every single one of you. It was raining that night, that relentless Seattle drizzle that drums against the window pane like a warning. I was sitting in my home office with the lights off, just enjoying the silence. My wife Patricia was asleep upstairs, or at least I hoped she was asleep. The Parkinson's makes her nights difficult, and her days even harder. I was exhausted. Not the good kind of tired you get after a day of honest work, but the heavy, soul-crushing fatigue of watching the woman you love slowly fade away. My phone vibrated against the mahogany desk. It was a single sharp buzz that cut through the darkness. I picked it up, squinting at the harsh blue light. A notification banner sat across the screen. Living room camera status active. My heart skipped a beat. I had called the technician quietly that morning while my son Brandon and his wife Tiffany were out at brunch. I thought the system was still rebooting. I almost swiped the notification away. I almost put the phone down and went to check on Patricia. But something, maybe that old engineer's gut instinct that has kept me alive on construction sites, told me to look. I tapped the screen. The video feed loaded instantly in high definition. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, in the living room I had paid for, sat Tiffany. She looked like the perfect daughter-in-law. Blonde hair pulled back, a soft pastel cardigan, the kind of woman who volunteers at the library. But on the screen, her face was twisted into a look of pure, concentrated malice. She was holding Patricia's medicine bottle, the levodopa, the pills that keep my wife from freezing up like a statue. Tiffany wasn't organizing them. She was dumping them out. I watched in silence as the little yellow tablets bounced onto the carpet. Then she reached into her designer purse and pulled out a plastic bag filled with different pills. Blue ones. Small, round, and unfamiliar. My hands started to shake. I zoomed in on the screen. She was filling the prescription bottle with the blue pills. But it wasn't just her. The camera angle shifted slightly, and I saw a pair of legs standing by the archway leading to the kitchen. It was Brandon, my son, the boy I taught to ride a bike, the man I paid tuition for. He wasn't stopping her. He was watching the front door. He looked pale, sweating even in the air-conditioned house. I turned up the volume on my phone. The audio was crisp. I heard Brandon's voice cracking with fear. "Tiffany, are you sure about this? If Dad finds out, we are done. We go to jail." Tiffany didn't even look up. Her voice came through the speaker like ice. "Stop being such a coward, Brandon. The old man is practically senile. He thinks the camera is broken. He thinks your mother is just getting worse. By the time the ambulance gets here, the blue pills will have dissolved. It will look like a natural decline. Did you get the insurance papers ready?" I felt like I had been punched in the chest. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't negligence. This was a plan, an execution. They were going to kill Patricia right under my nose and make me believe it was the disease. My grief turned into a hot white rage. I gripped the edge of my desk so hard I thought the wood would splinter. My first instinct was to roar, to storm out there and tear them apart with my bare hands. I stood up my chair, scraping loudly against the floorboards. On the screen, both of them froze. They looked up at the ceiling toward my office. Then, the video feed cut to black as Tiffany snatched the bottle. I heard real sounds now, not from the phone but from the hallway. Footsteps. Fast, heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. They were coming for me. I couldn't let them know I knew, not yet. I had to be the clueless old man they thought I was. If I confronted them now, Tiffany would flush the pills, and I would have no proof. I threw myself onto the leather recliner in the corner and closed my eyes, forcing my breathing to slow down, just as the doorknob turned. The door handle turned slowly, the brass mechanism clicking, with a sound that seemed deafening in the silence of my office. I shifted in the leather recliner, letting my head loll back against the headrest, my mouth slightly open. I had to look like a man who had dozed off while reading the newspaper, not a man who had just witnessed a conspiracy to commit murder. I slowed my breathing, forcing my chest to rise and fall in a heavy rhythmic pattern, even though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Hello, Dad." The voice was sweet, sickly sweet, like syrup covering something rotten. I opened my eyes, blinking groggily, putting on the performance of a lifetime. Standing in the doorway were Brandon and Tiffany. They looked like a picture from a magazine advertisement for the perfect family. Brandon held a silver tray with a steaming bowl of soup and some crusty bread. Tiffany stood next to him, her hands clasped in front of her, that fake, concerned smile plastered across her face. It was the same smile she wore at church, the same smile she wore when she told neighbors about her charity work. Now I knew what lay beneath it. I sat up, rubbing my eyes with feigned confusion. "Is it dinner time already? I must have drifted off." My voice sounded raspy, which was good. It fit the character of the tired, aging father they wanted me to be. Tiffany stepped into the room, bringing with her the scent of expensive perfume that suddenly made me nauseous. "You have been sleeping a lot lately, Dad," she said, her tone dripping with a condescending pity. "It is 7 o'clock. We brought dinner up because we did not want to disturb you, but Mom needs her medicine. You know she gets rigid if she misses a dose." Brandon set the tray down on my desk. He refused to look me in the eye. He focused intently on the soup, his hands trembling ever so slightly. My son. The boy I had taught to fish, to drive, to be a man of honor. He was standing there, complicit in this nightmare. I looked at him, searching for any sign of hesitation, any flicker of guilt. But he just kept his head down, a coward hiding in the shadow of his wife. I looked at the tray. Beside the soup bowl sat the orange prescription bottle. My stomach churned. I knew what was inside. Blue pills, haloperidol, a chemical straitjacket that would lock my wife's muscles and shut down her respiratory system. To the untrained eye, it would look like the final tragic stage of Parkinson's. To a coroner who wasn't looking for foul play, it would be a natural death. Tiffany knew this. She had been a nurse for 10 years before she lost her license for stealing narcotics, a detail we had kept private to protect the family reputation. Now she was using that education as a weapon. I reached for the bottle, my hand moving slower than necessary. "I see," I mumbled. "I thought I gave it to her at 4. Tiffany laughed, a short, sharp sound that held no humor. "Oh, Dad, you are getting so forgetful lately. It is worrying. You gave her the afternoon vitamin at 4. This is the evening dose." Dr. Evans was very specific about the timing. "Remember, we talked about this yesterday. She was doing it. She was rewriting reality, gaslighting me, making me question my own memory, so that when things went wrong later, I would blame myself. If I hadn't seen the video footage 5 minutes ago, I might have believed her. I might have apologized. I might have killed my own wife and spent the rest of my life consumed by guilt." The cruelty of it took my breath away. I picked up the bottle. It felt heavy in my hand, heavy with the weight of their betrayal. "I need to check the label," I said, reaching into my pocket for my reading glasses. "I just want to be sure." Tiffany's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Her eyes narrowed. Dad, it is the same bottle as always. Why are you being so difficult? Mom is waiting. She is in pain. Do you want her to suffer because you are being stubborn? She knew exactly where to strike. She used my love for Patricia as a leverage point. She painted me as the villain, the obstacle to my wife's comfort. I looked at Brandon. Son, I asked, do you think I am being stubborn? Brandon flinched. He finally looked up, his face pale and sweaty. Just give her the pills, Dad. Please. Let's just get this over with. Get this over with. That was a poor choice of words. He wasn't talking about the medication. He was talking about the murder. He wanted it done so he could stop shaking. I stood up, gripping the bottle. Okay. Let's go. But I am giving it to her. She likes it when I do it. Tiffany stepped in front of me, blocking my path to the door. Her voice dropped an octave, becoming firm, authoritative. The nurse taking charge of the unruly patient. Actually, Dad, I think I should do it. Your hands have been shaking lately. We do not want you to drop them or give her the wrong amount. Besides, you need to eat your soup before it gets cold. You look weak. She reached out to take the bottle from me. Her fingernails were painted a perfect glossy red. They looked like claws. I knew that if I handed this bottle over, Patricia would be dead by morning. But if I refused too aggressively, they would know I suspected something. If they knew I knew, with a $2 million debt hanging over Brandon's head, they might just decide to stage a double accident tonight. I was outnumbered and physically outmatched. I needed to be smart. I needed to be the clumsy old man they thought I was. I pulled the bottle back slightly. No, Tiffany. I am her husband. I will do it. I took a step forward, intentionally catching my foot on the edge of the rug. It was a move I had seen actors do 100 times, but I had to make it look real. I pitched forward, letting out a startled cry. My shoulder slammed into the doorframe, and I let my hand spasm. The bottle flew from my grip. It hit the hardwood floor with a loud clatter. The cap, which I had loosened just a fraction while I was pretending to inspect the label, popped off. The blue pills exploded outward, scattering across the Persian rug and rolling under the desk. "Oh, for God's sake!" Tiffany shrieked. Her mask of kindness shattered completely. She looked at the scattered pills with pure fury. "I am sorry. I am so sorry," I stammered, dropping to my knees immediately. I was right. My hands. I am so clumsy. Dad, Brandon yelled, exasperated. He dropped to his knees too, scrambling to collect the pills. "Don't touch them, Dad. We need to find all of them. These are expensive." I was on the floor, crawling on my hands and knees. My heart was pounding so hard I thought they could hear it. This was the moment. This was the only chance I would get. I saw a small blue pill resting near the leg of the recliner, hidden in the shadow of the leather. Tiffany was busy berating Brandon, telling him to check under the rug. Brandon was distracted, sweeping the floor with his hands. I reached out, my movement swift and precise. I grabbed the blue pill. In one smooth motion, I brought my hand up to my chest, pretending to clutch my heart, as if I was out of breath, and slipped the pill into the breast pocket of my flannel shirt. I got it. I stayed on the floor, breathing heavily, acting the part of the distressed senior. "I am sorry," I repeated, making my voice tremble. "I just wanted to help." Tiffany stood over me. She looked down with a mixture of disgust and hatred that was so raw it was almost impressive. She wasn't looking at a father-in-law. She was looking at a useless object that was taking too long to break. "Get up, Harold," she said. She dropped the dad act. "Get up. Brandon, pick up the pills. Wash them off. We can still use them." "But they have been on the floor," I protested weakly, as Brandon helped me to my feet. "It doesn't matter," Tiffany snapped. She snatched the bottle from Brandon, who had managed to scoop up most of the scattered tablets. "It is just a little dust. It won't kill her." The irony of her words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. No, the dust wouldn't kill her. The haloperidol would. Tiffany capped the bottle aggressively. "Sit down and eat your soup, Harold. I will take care of Patricia. Clearly you are not capable of handling simple tasks anymore. Maybe it is time we discussed that assisted living facility sooner rather than later." She turned on her heel and marched out of the room, the bottle clutched in her hand like a trophy. Brandon lingered for a second. He looked at me, and for a moment I saw the little boy who used to scrape his knees and come running to me for a Band-Aid. He looked terrified. He opened his mouth as if to say something, maybe to warn me, maybe to apologize. "Go," I said, my voice cold and hard. "Go help your wife." He flinched as if I had struck him, then turned and hurried after her. I stood alone in the office. The soup on the desk was getting cold. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small blue pill. It was tiny, innocuous looking, but it was the smoking gun. I had the evidence. Now I just had to survive long enough to use it. I checked my watch. The sun had set completely. The house was dark. And downstairs, I knew they were preparing the lethal dose. I didn't have much time. I needed to get to the basement, to the old intercom system. I needed to know exactly when they planned to strike. And more importantly, I needed to make sure they didn't come back to finish me off before the night was over. I locked the office door quietly. I didn't eat the soup. I poured it into the potted plant in the corner. I wasn't taking any chances. Then, moving with a speed that would have surprised my son, I slipped out the side door of the office that led to the back servants' staircase. The hunt was on, and they had no idea that the prey had just become the predator. The silence that followed the closing of the door was heavy and suffocating. I stood there for a moment, listening to the retreating footsteps of my son and daughter-in-law. I heard their whispers fade down the hallway, followed by the soft click of their bedroom door closing. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. The air in my lungs felt hot, tainted by the charade I had just performed. I moved quickly to the office door, my hand trembling as I turned the heavy brass lock. The click echoed in the room, a small sound that marked the boundary between their world of lies and my sanctuary of truth. I leaned my back against the wood of the door, closing my eyes for a second. I needed to compose myself. I was a structural engineer. I solved problems. I dealt with facts, with loads, with stress points. I could not afford to be a heartbroken father right now. I had to be a cold, calculating investigator. I pushed myself off the door and walked back to my desk, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. I reached into the pocket of my flannel shirt. My fingers brushed against the small, hard object I had stolen from the floor. I pulled it out and placed it in the center of my desk blotter. Under the warm glow of the desk lamp, the pill looked innocuous. It was small, round, and a pale shade of blue. To anyone else, it was just medicine, but I knew it was a weapon. I opened the top drawer of my desk and retrieved my magnifying glass. It was an old tool, one I had used for decades to inspect blueprints and examine hairline fractures in concrete samples. I never thought I would use it to inspect the instrument of my wife's murder. I leaned over the desk, bringing the glass down until the pill came into sharp focus. The blurry surface resolved into clear, stamped letters and numbers. I memorized the code. I did not trust myself to write it down, fearing I might leave the paper somewhere they could find it. I turned to my computer, waking the screen from its sleep mode. The blue light washed over my face, harsh and clinical. I opened a private browsing window and typed the code into a pharmaceutical identification database. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that seemed to count down the seconds of my life. The search results loaded instantly. Haloperidol. I stared at the word. I knew it. I did not need to read the description to know that my worst fears were confirmed, but I forced myself to read every line. Haloperidol is a high-potency first-generation antipsychotic. It is used to treat schizophrenia and acute psychosis. I scrolled down to the warnings. The text seemed to scream at me from the screen. Contraindications. severe central nervous system depression, Parkinson's disease. I felt bile rise in my throat. I knew a bit about pharmacology from caring for Patricia over the last 5 years. Parkinson's disease is caused by a lack of dopamine in the brain. That is why she takes levodopa to replace what her body cannot make. Haloperidol works by blocking dopamine receptors. If Tiffany gave this to Patricia, it would not just make her sleep. It would be like shutting off the oxygen to a diver deep underwater. It would lock her body into a state of extreme rigidity. Her muscles would freeze. She would be unable to swallow, unable to move, and eventually unable to breathe. It would look like a sudden catastrophic progression of her disease. Rigidity, akinetic mutism, respiratory failure. It was a cruel, agonizing way to die. And Tiffany, with her nursing background, knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't just killing my wife, she was torturing her to death. I slumped back in my chair, the strength draining from my body. I looked at the blue pill sitting on my desk. It was no longer just a piece of chemical compound. It was a symbol of pure evil. And my son was part of it. That was the thought that broke me. I spun my chair around, facing the dark corner of the room, away from the computer screen. I put my face in my hands and let out a shuddering breath. Brandon. My boy. Images from the past flooded my mind, unbidden and painful. I saw him as a 5-year-old running across the lawn with a scraped knee, crying for me to fix it. I saw him at 10, sitting at the kitchen table, carefully gluing a wingback onto a model airplane because he didn't want it to be broken. I saw him at 16, standing tall in his varsity jacket, promising me that he would make me proud. I remembered a specific afternoon when he was 12. We were fishing down by the lake. He had caught a small perch, but the hook had gone deep. Instead of ripping it out, he had sat there for 20 minutes, gently working it free with tears in his eyes, because he didn't want to hurt the fish. When he finally released it back into the water, he looked at me with those big brown eyes and said, "Life is important, right, Dad?" Where was that boy? Where was the child who cried over a hurt fish? He had been replaced by a man who stood watch while his wife prepared a lethal cocktail for his own mother. He had been replaced by a coward who valued money over the woman who gave him birth. I tried to pinpoint where I went wrong. Did I work too much? Did I give him too much money? Did I shield him from the consequences of his actions so often that he thought he could get away with anything? Even murder, the pain was physical. It felt like a jagged stone in the center of my chest. I wanted to grieve. I wanted to mourn the loss of the son I thought I had. But I couldn't. Not yet. Grief is a luxury for the living, and right now I was fighting to keep us among them. I wiped my face with my rough hands. I had to focus on the why. Why now? Why tonight? Tiffany was evil. I had always suspected that. She was cold, calculating, and materialistic. But Brandon was weak. He was a follower. What kind of pressure was he under that would make him agree to this? As if the universe was listening to my question, my phone buzzed on the desk. It was not the camera alert. It was a different tone, a sharp chime that I had set for financial notifications. I picked up the phone, my eyes adjusting to the brightness. It was a text message from my bank's fraud detection system. Transaction declined. Attempted withdrawal of $5,000 from ATM at the Horseshoe Casino. Card ending in 4498. The card ending in 4498. That was the emergency supplementary credit card I had given Brandon years ago. I had set a limit on it and practically forgotten about it. He hadn't used it in months. $5,000. At a casino ATM. Tonight. I stared at the timestamp. The attempt was made 2 minutes ago. My blood ran cold. Brandon wasn't in his room sleeping. He wasn't comforting his wife. He was likely in the bathroom or the closet, frantically trying to pull cash from a card I paid for. Why would he need $5,000 in cash at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night? You don't need cash for a mortgage payment. You don't need cash for groceries. You need cash for sharks. You need cash for debts that are off the books. I connected the dots. The desperation in his voice I heard on the camera. The sweating. The shaking hands. The rush to get the inheritance. He wasn't just greedy. He was drowning. He had gambled everything away. My son was not just a failure. He was a desperate debtor who had likely borrowed money from dangerous people. And now those people wanted their money back. The realization hit me with the force of a sledgehammer. He was selling us. He was trading his mother's life for a stack of chips to pay off a bookie or a drug dealer. I looked at the notification again. The declined transaction meant he was out of options. He had hit the wall. A desperate man is a dangerous man. If he couldn't get the money from the card and he couldn't get the inheritance quickly enough, what would he do next? A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. I realized that the timeline had just accelerated. They weren't going to wait for the pills to work slowly. If Brandon needed money tonight, or by tomorrow morning, they needed Patricia dead immediately. I was not just dealing with murderers. I was dealing with cornered rats. And I was the only thing standing between them and the cheese. I sat up straight, the grief vanishing, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I placed the phone back on the desk next to the pill. The evidence was mounting. But so was the danger. I needed to know exactly how deep in the hole he was. I needed to hear it from his own mouth. I remembered the old intercom system, the one connected to the garage but which also had a receiver in the master bedroom's walk-in closet, the closet that shared a ventilation shaft with the guest room where Brandon and Tiffany were staying. I stood up. I had to move. I had to get to the basement garage. If my hunch was right, Brandon would not be sleeping. He would be panicking. And panic makes people talk. I checked the lock on the office door one last time, turned off the computer screen, and moved toward the hidden servants' staircase that led down to the darkness of the lower level. The night was far from over. The servants' staircase was narrow, smelling faintly of old cedar and damp earth. It was a passage I had not used in years, a relic from when this house was bustling with staff and energy. Now it served as my descent into the underworld of my own home. I moved slowly, gripping the rough wooden railing, placing my feet carefully on the edges of the steps to avoid the creaks that come with age. Every sound felt amplified, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do next. I reached the bottom landing and pushed open the heavy steel fire door that led to the garage. The air here was different. It was cold, sharp, and smelled of motor oil, sawdust, and gasoline. This was my sanctuary. For 40 years, this garage had been my retreat from the world. It was where I restored my classic Mustang, where I fixed the lawnmowers, where I built the birdhouses that Patricia loved so much. It was a place of honest labor, where broken things were mended with patience and skill. My children hated it down here. Brandon used to complain about the grease stains on his clothes, and Tiffany turned her nose up at the dust, calling it a hoarding pit. To them, it was just a dirty room full of junk. To me, it was the only place left where I had total control. I did not turn on the overhead fluorescent lights. Their hum would be too loud, and the sudden brightness might spill out under the garage doors. Instead, I navigated by memory, in the gloom, my hand trailing along the familiar edge of my workbench. My fingers brushed against wrenches, screwdrivers, and jars of nails, each one in its specific place. I made my way to the far wall behind a stack of old tires and a dusty tarp covering the lawn tractor. There, mounted on the pegboard, was a small beige plastic box. It was an intercom system I had installed in 1995. Back then, Brandon was just a teenager, and he had gone through a rebellious phase. I had wired the house myself, running cables behind the drywall so Patricia could call me in the garage without having to shout down the stairs. But I had also installed a master override switch that allowed me to listen in on the other rooms. I had used it exactly twice in my life, once to make sure Brandon wasn't sneaking out, and once to check if Patricia was calling for help after her diagnosis. For the last 10 years, it had sat there gathering dust, a piece of obsolete technology in a world of smartphones and Wi-Fi cameras. Tiffany and Brandon probably didn't even know it existed, or if they did, they assumed it was broken, like everything else they thought was old and useless. I reached out and wiped the layer of grime from the faceplate. My hand hovered over the dial. The plastic was cold. I felt a surge of hesitation. Eavesdropping is a violation. It is a breach of trust. But the image of that blue pill on my desk flashed in my mind. The trust was already gone. It had been dissolved in a glass of water and fed to my wife. I turned the dial to channel 3. The guest suite. A burst of static hissed through the small speaker, loud in the silence of the garage. I quickly covered the speaker with my palm, muffling the sound, and adjusted the squelch knob until the hiss faded into a low hum. At first, there was only silence, then a sound that made my stomach tighten. Sobbing. It was a pathetic, gasping sound, like an animal trapped in a snare. It was Brandon. "Get a hold of yourself, Brandon. Look at me." Tiffany's voice was sharp, cutting through the static. She wasn't whispering anymore. She sounded angry, but beneath the anger I heard something else. Fear. Controlled, calculated fear. I leaned in closer to the beige box, my ear pressed against the plastic grid. "I can't do it, Tiff. I can't do it." Brandon's voice was shaking so hard the words were barely intelligible. I saw him. I saw his face when he dropped the pills. He looked so old. He's my dad. And Mom. God. Tiff, she looked at me today. She looked right at me. "Oh, shut up," Tiffany hissed. The sound of a slap echoed through the speaker. It was a wet, meaty sound. "Listen to me, you pathetic little man. We do not have a choice. Do you understand? We are past the point of no return. You put the pills in the bottle. You are an accessory to attempted murder already. If we stop now, we go to jail. Is that what you want? You want to be someone's girlfriend in a federal prison house?" I squeezed my eyes shut. Hearing my son being slapped by his wife, hearing him reduced to this whimpering mess, was almost as painful as the murder plot itself. But I needed to hear the reason. I needed the number. "It is not just jail." Brandon whimpered. His voice dropped to a terrified whisper that I had to strain to hear. "It's the Russians, Tiff. They called me again while Dad was in the bathroom. They know we are here. They said they are tired of waiting." I froze. Russians. This was not just a gambling debt at a local casino. This was organized crime. "How much time did you buy us?" Tiffany asked. Her voice was devoid of sympathy. She sounded like a project manager discussing a deadline. I told them the inheritance is coming. I told them Dad is signing the house over this week. But they said they don't want a house. They want liquid cash. "We will sell the house immediately to one of those cash for homes companies," Tiffany replied quickly. "We will take a hit on the value, but we can get $1 million out of it by Wednesday if the title is in our name. Plus, the life insurance policy on your mother is another $500,000. That covers the interest." "It is not enough," Brandon practically screamed, and then I heard a muffled sound like he was biting into a pillow to stifle the noise. "It is not enough, Tiffany. The interest, it compounded." I tried to win it back. I tried to short the market with the last loan, but I lost it all. There was a silence on the line. A long, heavy silence. "How much?" Brandon Tiffany asked. Her voice was dangerously quiet. I gripped the edge of the workbench so hard my knuckles turned white. $2 million, Brandon sobbed. "I owe them $2 million. I felt the blood drain from my face. $2 million. He hadn't just made a mistake. He had dug a grave so deep he could never climb out. $2 million was more than the house was worth. It was everything I had saved for 40 years. 2 million, Tiffany repeated. I could hear the shock in her voice, but she recovered quickly. Okay. We can still make this work. But we need everything. We need the house, the insurance, and your dad's retirement accounts. We need all of it. But Dad won't sign if Mom is still... Brandon trailed off. Exactly, Tiffany said. Her voice was cold steel now. That is why tonight has to happen. We don't have a week. We don't have days. I leaned closer, my heart pounding in my ears, knowing I was about to hear the death sentence. But what if the pills don't work fast enough? Brandon asked. They will work, Tiffany assured him. Her respiratory system is already weak. Once the haloperidol hits her bloodstream, her diaphragm will seize up. She will suffocate in her sleep. It will be peaceful. But it has to be tonight, Brandon. Because if she is still alive tomorrow morning, your father won't have a reason to sign the power of attorney. He will delay. And we cannot afford a delay. I stood in the dark garage trembling with rage. It was a simple equation to them. My wife's life for their debt. Patricia's breath for their safety. I heard Brandon take a deep, shuddering breath. They sent me a picture, Tiff. They sent me a picture of a pair of gardening shears. I held my breath. Monday. Brandon choked out, his voice cracking with absolute terror. They said Monday. They will come to cut off my fingers. If I don't have the $2 million, Mom must die tonight, so Dad can sign the house papers tomorrow. The climb back up the stairs felt like ascending a gallows. Every step was heavy with the weight of the conversation I had just overheard in the garage. $2 million. The Russian mob. Monday morning. The timeline was no longer a vague threat. It was a ticking bomb strapped to the foundation of my life. My son had not just made a mistake. He had sold us out to butchers to save his own skin. But as I reached the landing, the anger that had fueled me in the garage began to curdle into a cold, sickening dread. I wasn't just a father whose son had betrayed him. I was a husband whose wife was currently lying in a room just down the hall, possibly dying. I moved like a ghost toward the master bedroom. The house was silent, wrapped in the oppressive quiet of the night, broken only by the relentless drumming of the Seattle rain against the roof. I pushed the door open, grateful that I had oiled the hinges just last week. The room was dim, lit only by the faint amber glow of the street lamp filtering through the heavy curtains. It smelled of lavender and antiseptic, the scent of a long illness. Patricia was there, a small shape beneath the heavy down comforter. I approached the bed, my heart hammering against my ribs, terrified of what I might find. She was still breathing, but the sound was wrong. It wasn't the rhythmic, soft breathing of sleep. It was ragged and shallow, a wet, rasping sound that caught in her throat every few seconds. I knelt beside the bed, my knees cracking on the hardwood floor, and reached out to touch her hand. Her skin was clammy cold to the touch, but it was the texture of her muscles that made my stomach drop. Her arm, usually soft and frail, felt hard, rigid. I tried to gently massage her fingers, hoping to find some pliability, some response, but they were locked in a claw-like grip. Lead pipe rigidity. That was what the books called it. It was a classic sign of neuroleptic malignant syndrome, a severe reaction to antipsychotic drugs like haloperidol. My breath hitched in my throat. Tiffany had lied. She hadn't just tried to give the pills at dinner. She must have slipped something into Patricia's afternoon tea, or maybe the water she drank with lunch. The poison was already in her system. It was already working systematically, shutting down the neural pathways that controlled her movement, her swallowing, and eventually her breathing. I looked at my wife's face. In the shadows, she looked pale, her features drawn tight, as if she were in pain even while unconscious. This was the woman who had stood by me when I was a broke junior engineer living in a studio apartment. She was the one who had saved every penny so we could buy our first house. She was the one who had held my hand when my own parents died. She was the love of my life, the moral center of our family. And now she was being murdered by the child she had nursed, the boy she had stayed up with when he had fevers, the man she had defended, even when I said he was being reckless. Tears blurred my vision, hot and stinging. I brushed a stray lock of gray hair from her forehead. "I am so sorry. Patty," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I am so sorry. I failed you." I was so busy building bridges and securing our future that I didn't see the rot growing inside our own home. I raised a monster, Patty. We gave him everything, and he turned it into a weapon against us. The guilt was a physical weight crushing my chest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her awake and tell her we had to run, but I knew she couldn't move. I was alone in this. My hand went to my pocket, gripping my smartphone. The screen lit up the darkness. The numbers 911 stared back at me from the emergency dialer. It would be so easy. One press of a button. In 10 minutes, this room would be filled with paramedics and police officers. They would take Patricia to the hospital. They would pump her stomach. They would arrest Brandon and Tiffany. My thumb hovered over the green call button. I could end this nightmare right now. But then the engineer in me took over. The part of my brain that analyzed risk and structural failure kicked in. I froze. If I called the police now, what would happen really happen? They would find a sick elderly woman having a bad reaction to medication. Tiffany would be standing there wearing her nursing scrubs, looking concerned. She would tell the officers that she was just following the doctor's orders. She would say that perhaps Harold, the confused and aging husband, had mixed up the bottles earlier in the day. Or she would throw Brandon under the bus immediately. She would say Brandon gave the meds. She would play the innocent, horrified wife who had no idea her husband was trying to kill his mother. I thought about Tiffany's face on the camera feed, the cold, reptilian calculation. She was smart. She knew the legal system. Without undeniable proof, without catching her in the act, or having a recording of her confessing to the murder plot, it would be her word against mine. And she was a young, articulate white woman with a medical background. I was a distraught 70-year-old man who had just admitted to being confused about pills earlier that evening. There was a terrifying possibility that she could talk her way out of it. She could claim medical error. She could claim accidental overdose. And if she walked free, she would come back. She would sue for guardianship. She would paint me as incompetent. And Brandon. My son was weak. If Tiffany was cornered, she would manipulate him into taking the fall alone. He would go to prison for life, and she would disappear with whatever assets she could claw out of the divorce. No. Calling the police now was a gamble I couldn't afford to take. The stakes were not just justice. They were survival. To save Patricia permanently, I had to destroy Tiffany completely. I needed her to tighten the noose around her own neck. I needed the camera to see her do it. I needed the audio of her intent. I needed a confession that no lawyer could ever suppress. I slowly lowered the phone, the light fading from the screen. It was the hardest decision of my life. To wait. To let the woman I love suffer for another hour, to use her as bait in a trap for her killers. I felt like a monster myself. I leaned down and kissed Patricia's forehead. "Hang on, Patty," I whispered. "Just hang on a little longer. I promise you I will make them pay. I will burn their world down for this." Suddenly, Patricia gasped. It wasn't a normal intake of breath. It was a sharp sucking sound, like a swimmer surfacing for air. Her eyes flew open. I jolted back, startled. Patty. Her eyes were wide, staring up at the ceiling in sheer panic. They darted frantically back and forth, unable to focus on me. The drug was messing with her vision, causing nystagmus. She tried to lift her head, but her neck muscles were locked. She looked like a prisoner in her own body. "Patty, it's me. It's Harry. I am here. She tried to speak. Her jaw worked, grinding her teeth together, but her lips were stiff. A low, guttural moan escaped her throat. It was the sound of pure frustration and terror. She was awake, she was conscious, but she couldn't move. She was trapped in a nightmare, unable to scream. I leaned closer, my ear hovering inches from her mouth. Tell me, Patty. Tell me what you need. She swallowed a convulsing motion that looked painful. Her tongue, swollen and heavy, pushed against her teeth. She forced the air out of her lungs, fighting the paralysis that was creeping down her throat. What? I reached for the glass on the nightstand, but she made a sharp sound in her throat. A refusal. No, not that. I froze my hand midair. What? She wheezed, her voice barely a whisper, breathless and dry. Bitter. The word hung in the air between us. Bitter. She wasn't asking for water. She was telling me about the water she had already drank. Bitter. She repeated, a tear leaking from the corner of her eye and sliding into her gray hair. Blue in water. My blood turned to ice. Tiffany hadn't just swapped the pills. She had dissolved them. She had crushed the haloperidol into Patricia's water glass earlier that afternoon. That was why the reaction was so fast. That was why Tiffany was so confident. The weapon wasn't just in the bottle. It had already been deployed. Patricia looked at me, her eyes pleading. She knew, somewhere in the fog of her illness, she knew something was wrong. She knew the water shouldn't taste like chemicals. She knew her body shouldn't feel like stone. Help me. The desperation in her voice broke the last remnant of my hesitation. I gripped her hand, squeezing the rigid fingers. I am going to help you, Patty. I swear to God. But I need you to be strong. I need you to close your eyes and pretend to sleep. Can you do that for me? She stared at me through confusion, warring with fear. They are coming back, Patty, I whispered urgently. And if they see you awake, they will hurt you. You have to pretend. Please, trust me. She looked at me for a long, agonizing second. Then slowly, with immense effort, she let her eyelids droop shut. Her breathing remained ragged, but she stopped trying to move. I kissed her hand one last time and stood up. I had my confirmation. I had my motivation. Now I needed my shotgun. I turned to leave the room, my movements silent and predatory. I wasn't just an old man anymore. I was the hunter, and the wolves were at the door. I checked my watch. It was 10:30. The main event was about to begin. I slipped out of the room and headed for the darkness of the hallway, my mind racing with the layout of the trap I was about to spring. The time for sorrow was over. The time for violence had arrived. The morning sun did not bring relief. It brought a harsh, exposing light that made the events of the previous night feel like a fever dream. But the weight of the shotgun shell in my pocket was real. The image of my wife lying paralyzed in her bed was real. I had spent the hours between midnight and dawn sitting in the armchair by the window, watching the rain stop and the gray clouds begin to break. I had not slept. I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Tiffany's face on that camera feed, coolly dispensing death as if she were pouring sugar into tea. Now, as the clock struck 8, I knew it was time to start the performance of my life. I had to be the broken man they wanted me to be. I had to be the senile, overwhelmed old fool who was ready to surrender his kingdom. I shuffled down the hallway, deliberately dragging my feet. I had messed up my hair, left my shirt untucked, and skipped shaving. The stubble on my chin was gray and rough, adding to the look of a man who had given up on himself. I could smell bacon and coffee coming from the kitchen. It was a domestic smell, warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the cold-blooded murder plot unfolding under this roof. It made my stomach turn. When I entered the kitchen, the scene was almost grotesque in its normalcy. Tiffany was standing by the stove flipping pancakes. She was wearing a floral apron over her yoga clothes, humming a soft tune. Brandon was sitting at the island, staring into a mug of black coffee. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, surrounded by dark circles that spoke of his own sleepless night. His leg was bouncing nervously under the table. When he saw me, he flinched, splashing a little coffee onto his hand. "Morning, Dad." Brandon mumbled, wiping his hand on his jeans. He sounded hoarse. I did not answer immediately. I walked to the coffee pot, letting my hand tremble as I reached for a mug. I let the ceramic clink loudly against the granite counter, a clumsy, jarring sound. "Morning," rasped my voice, weak and thinned by exhaustion. "Is your mother awake?" Tiffany turned around, flashing that bright, predatory smile. "Not yet, Harold. I checked on her a few minutes ago. She is sleeping deeply. I think she really needed the rest. You know how restless she has been. She was talking about the coma she had induced. She was talking about my wife's body slowly shutting down." I gripped the mug, forcing myself not to throw it at her face. I must have messed up the pills," I said, looking down at my feet. I sat down at the table, slumping my shoulders. I was thinking about it all night. I got confused. The yellow bottle, the blue bottle. I don't remember which one I opened. The room went silent. I risked a glance at them. Tiffany and Brandon exchanged a look. It was a look of pure triumph. They thought I was doing their work for them. I was validating their narrative. I was admitting incompetence. "Don't worry about it, Dad," Tiffany said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy as she placed a plate of pancakes in front of me. "We all have those moments. That is why I am here, to help you manage things. You have been under so much stress lately. Taking care of Patricia all by yourself. It is too much for one person, especially at your age." I picked up my fork and let it hover over the food, staring blankly at the syrup. "It is too much," I whispered, letting a tear leak out of my eye. I practiced this in the mirror upstairs. "I am tired, Brandon. I am so tired. I looked at the bank accounts this morning. I can't make sense of the numbers anymore. I feel like I am drowning." Brandon looked up, a flicker of hope in his terrified eyes. "What do you mean, Dad?" I put the fork down with a clatter. "I mean, I am done. I can't fight this anymore. Your mother is getting worse. I am getting forgetful. I almost hurt her last night with the medicine. I can't trust myself." I took a deep, shuddering breath, preparing to deliver the line that would seal the trap. "I have decided to call my lawyer, Mr. Henderson, tomorrow morning. I am going to have him draw up the papers. I want to transfer the power of attorney to you kids. You should handle the house. You should handle the accounts. I just want to sit with your mother and hold her hand until the end. I don't want to think about money anymore." The effect was instantaneous. Brandon stopped bouncing his leg. He sat up straighter, looking like a man who had just been pulled from a burning building. The relief on his face was so profound, it was almost pathetic. He thought he was saved. He thought the $2 million would be his by Tuesday. "Dad, are you sure?" Brandon asked, trying to sound concerned but failing to hide the eagerness in his voice. "That is a big step." "It is the only step," I said, shaking my head. "I trust you, son. You are a businessman. You know how to handle these things better than an old engineer. Take the house. Take the investments. Just promise me you will take care of us." Tiffany walked over and put her hand on my shoulder. Her touch felt like a brand burning through my shirt. "Oh, Harold, that is such a wise decision. Really, it is for the best. We will take care of everything. You won't have to worry about a single bill. We can get the paperwork started first thing tomorrow." She squeezed my shoulder, and I knew she was already mentally spending my life savings. She was calculating how fast she could liquidate my portfolio. But I wasn't done. I had to make them feel completely secure. I had to make them believe the victory was absolute so they would lower their guard for tonight. I want it to be easy, I mumbled. I don't want any arguments. There won't be any arguments, Dad Brandon said, his voice stronger now. We will handle it. I will call the lawyer myself and tell him to rush the draft. I nodded slowly, picking up my coffee with both hands to hide the fact that my knuckles were white from clenching them. Good. That is good. I took a sip of the coffee. It was bitter, but it gave me clarity. I had just promised them the world. I had just given them the motive to finish the job tonight. If Patricia died tonight, and I signed the papers tomorrow morning in my grief, they would have everything. The timeline was set. But then Tiffany did something I didn't expect. She didn't just go back to the stove. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked over to her purse, which was sitting on the kitchen counter. Actually, Dad, she said, her voice casual, almost too casual. Since we are getting everything in order, there is one small thing we could handle right now, just to save time for tomorrow. My internal radar pinged. Danger. She pulled a folded document out of her bag. It wasn't crisp and new. It looked like she had been carrying it around for days, waiting for the right moment. She smoothed it out on the table in front of me. What is this? I asked, peering at it without my glasses. It is just a standard medical form, Tiffany lied smoothly. She pulled a pen from her pocket and clicked it. Since you admitted you are confused about Mom's meds, and since her condition is deteriorating so fast, the doctors need to know what your wishes are. This just says that if she has an episode, if her heart stops or she stops breathing, we shouldn't traumatize her with aggressive machines. It says we should let her go peacefully. I looked down at the paper. The text was dense, but the title at the top was bold and clear even to my blurred vision. Do not resuscitate order. And below that, refusal of emergency intervention. My blood ran cold. She wasn't just waiting for the poison to work. She was ensuring that if I called 911, the paramedics would be legally stopped from saving Patricia's life. If I signed this and the haloperidol stopped my wife's heart, no one could perform CPR. No one could intubate her. Tiffany was trying to legalize the murder before it even finished happening. It is just a formality, Harold, Tiffany said, pushing the pen into my trembling hand. She smiled, but her eyes were cold, dead sharks swimming in blue water. Since you are giving us control tomorrow, you should sign this today. It is what Patricia would want. She wouldn't want to suffer, would she? Just sign right here at the bottom, and we can all relax. I stared at the tip of the pen. I stared at the line where my signature was supposed to go. I felt Tiffany's gaze boring into the top of my head. I felt Brandon holding his breath. This was the cliff edge. If I refused, the senile old man act would crack. If I signed, I was signing my wife's death warrant. The Sunday evening air was thick and heavy, hanging over the house like a wet wool blanket. I sat in the living room pretending to read a book, but my eyes never moved past the first sentence of the page. The silence in the house was not peaceful. It was the held breath of a predator waiting to strike. Upstairs, my wife was lying in a drug-induced coma, fighting for every breath, while her killers paced the floorboards above my head. I could hear their muffled footsteps back and forth, back and forth. They were waiting for Monday morning. They were waiting for me to sign the papers. But the universe had other plans, and the timeline was about to shatter. At 8:10, the darkness of the driveway was sliced open by the blinding white beams of halogen headlights. A large black SUV pulled up to the front gate, not slowing down, not hesitating. It rolled right up to the front steps, the tires crunching loudly on the gravel. This was not a delivery driver. This was not a neighbor. This was an invasion. I heard a gasp from the top of the stairs. I looked up to see Brandon peering through the hallway window. His face, which had been pale all day, drained of color completely until he looked like a ghost. He stumbled back, his hands shaking so violently he had to grab the banister to keep from falling. "It is them," he squeaked, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine of pure terror. "Oh God, Tiffany, it is them, they are here early." Tiffany appeared beside him, her face tight with anger. "Who is here? Who is it, Brandon? The Russians!" Brandon hyperventilated, his knees actually knocking together. He looked around wildly like a trapped rat looking for a hole. "I can't talk to them. I don't have the money yet." "They will take my fingers, Tiffany. They said they would cut them off right here in the house." He did not look at me. He did not think about protecting his mother or his father. He spun around and ran into the guest bedroom, and a second later I heard the door to the walk-in closet slam shut. My son, the man I had raised to stand tall, was cowering among the winter coats while strangers marched up to our door. Tiffany looked down at me. For a split second I saw fear in her eyes too, but she shoved it down instantly. She was a survivor, I would give her that. She pointed a manicured finger at the front door. "Harold, answer the door," she commanded, her voice sharp and breathless. "It is probably just someone lost. Or a salesman. Go get rid of them." She turned and retreated into the shadows of the hallway, leaving me alone in the foyer. I stood up slowly. My joints popped. I was 70 years old. I had a bad back and arthritis in my knees. But as I walked toward that heavy oak door, I felt something shift inside me. I was not Harold the retiree. I was not Harold the victim. I was the chief engineer who had managed 500 roughnecks on the wildest bridge projects in the Pacific Northwest. I had stared down union breakers, corrupt inspectors, and storms that could snap steel cables. I straightened my spine. I buttoned my cardigan. I was the master of this house, and no one was going to smell fear on me tonight. The doorbell did not ring. Instead, 3 heavy rhythmic pounds shook the frame. Boom, boom, boom. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. The damp night air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain and expensive cologne. Standing on my porch were 3 men. They looked like a wall of muscle wrapped in dark trench coats. The 2 in the back were giants, their eyes scanning the interior of my house with professional boredom. But the man in the front was different. He was shorter, leaner, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He had a scar running through his left eyebrow, and his eyes were dark, intelligent, and completely devoid of mercy. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" I asked. My voice was steady. It was low and rumbling, the voice I used to use to give orders over the roar of excavators. The man in front smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Good evening, Mr. Sullivan. We are looking for Brandon. Is he home?" "My son is not available," I said, blocking the doorway with my body. "And I do not recall him having any appointments on a Sunday night." "Who are you?" The man stepped closer. He invaded my personal space, looming over me, trying to use his physical presence to make me shrink. I did not step back. I held my ground, looking him dead in the eye. "We are associates of your son," the man said softly. "He has something that belongs to us. We were told that he would have it by tomorrow, but my employer is a very impatient man. He likes to check in on his investments." "I know what this is about," I said, deciding to drop the pretense. "I know he owes you money, but you are not getting it tonight. And you are trespassing on private property. I suggest you get back in your car and leave before I call the police." The man laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound. "Police? You won't call the police, old man. Because if the police come, they will start asking questions about where Brandon got the money to lose in the first place. And they might ask about what is happening in the bedroom upstairs." My heart skipped a beat. How much did they know? Were they watching the house, or was he just bluffing? The man leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than a shout. "Listen to me closely, Mr. Sullivan. I respect your generation. You are tough. I can see that. But your son, he is soft. He is weak. He borrowed $2 million in cryptocurrency on a margin call, and he lost it all in 48 hours. Do you know what he used as collateral? I stayed silent, my jaw clenched. He didn't have any assets, the man continued, enjoying the look on my face. So he used a guarantor. He signed a contract stating that he had full power of attorney over this estate. He pledged this house. He pledged your retirement accounts. And he pledged your life insurance policies. The rage flared up in my chest, hot and blinding. Brandon hadn't just waited for us to die. He had already sold our deaths to the highest bidder. He does not have power of attorney, I said through gritted teeth. Not yet, the man replied calmly. But he told us he would have it by Monday morning. He said nature was taking its course. He said there would be a tragedy in the family tonight. The man looked up at the ceiling toward the room where Patricia lay. We are not unreasonable, Mr. Sullivan. We just want to get paid. If Brandon pays us tomorrow, we go away. But if he doesn't, well, we have to liquidate the collateral. That means we take the house. We take everything. And since your son put your lives on the line, we might have to collect on that too. He reached into his coat pocket. I tensed, ready to swing the heavy brass door knocker at his head if he pulled a weapon. But he pulled out a cigar cutter. He clicked it open and shut. Snap, snap. You have 24 hours, the man said. Tell Brandon to come out of the closet. Tell him the clock is ticking. He turned to leave, but then he stopped. He looked at the large ceramic planter sitting on the porch railing. It was Patricia's pride and joy, a rare blue orchid she had nurtured for 5 years. It was in full bloom, delicate and beautiful. Nice flowers, the man said. With a casual, almost lazy motion, he swept his arm out. He shoved the heavy pot off the railing. It fell in slow motion. I wanted to reach out and catch it, but I was too far away. It hit the concrete driveway with a sickening crash. The ceramic shattered into 1,000 pieces. The dark soil spilled out across the wet pavement, and the delicate blue flowers were crushed instantly under the debris. That was the sound of your peaceful life ending, the man said without looking back. He signaled to his goons, and they walked back to the SUV, the engines roaring to life. I stood there staring at the broken shards of my wife's favorite flower. That pot had survived 3 moves. It had survived winter storms, but it couldn't survive the violence my son had invited to our doorstep. I felt a coldness settle over me that was deeper than the night air. I wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had evaporated when the pot shattered. Now there was only clarity. They had threatened my wife. They had destroyed her sanctuary. They thought they gave me 24 hours. They were wrong. I didn't need 24 hours. I just needed tonight. I looked at the retreating taillights of the black car. You made a mistake, I whispered to the darkness. You bet on the wrong Sullivan. I turned around and closed the door, locking the deadbolt with a solid final click. I was done playing defense. It was time to go on the offense. I walked toward the stairs, stepping over the invisible line between the man I used to be and the man I had to become to survive the night. Brandon was upstairs in the closet. Tiffany was plotting in the hallway, and I was coming for both of them. I turned the deadbolt on the front door, locking out the night and the monsters that inhabited it. The silence that rushed back into the hallway was sudden and deafening. My heart was still hammering a rhythm of combat against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I took a deep breath, smelling the ozone of the rain and the lingering, acrid scent of the cigar smoke the gangster had left behind. It was over. The warning had been delivered. Now the real threat was inside the house. I turned around to face the foyer. For a long moment, the hallway was empty. Then the door to the guest room closet creaked open. It was a slow, hesitant sound, like a coffin lid being lifted. Brandon emerged. He looked wretched. His designer shirt was rumpled and stained with sweat. His hair was plastered to his forehead. He did not look like a 35-year-old man. He looked like a terrified child who had broken a vase and was waiting for the punishment. But as he looked at me, his expression shifted. It wasn't relief I saw in his eyes. It was resentment. He stumbled toward me, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "Are they gone?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "Did you get rid of them?" I looked at him, feeling a wave of exhaustion so profound it almost buckled my knees. "Yes, Brandon. They are gone. For now." He let out a breath that was half sob, half laugh. "Oh, thank God. I thought they were coming inside. I thought they were going to—" He trailed off, looking at his own hands, checking to make sure his fingers were still attached. Then the fear in his eyes hardened into something ugly. He looked up at me and his face twisted into a scowl. "Why didn't you pay them, Dad?" The question hung in the air, absurd and poisonous. I blinked, sure I had misheard him. "Excuse me, you heard me," Brandon snapped. His voice gained strength, fueled by a sudden irrational anger. "You have the money. I know you do. You have retirement accounts. You have stocks. You have equity in this house. Why did you just stand there and let them threaten me? Why do you have to be so stingy?" I stared at him. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My son, who had gambled away a fortune, who had brought killers to my doorstep, was standing in my hallway, accusing me of being cheap. "Brandon," I said, my voice low and dangerous, "you owe $2 million. I do not have $2 million in cash lying around. And even if I did, why should I pay for your mistakes?" "Because you are my father," he screamed, his voice cracking. "You are supposed to help me. What is the point of you hoarding all that money if your son gets mutilated? Do you want me to die? Is that it? Do you want them to kill me so you can keep your precious savings?" The sheer audacity of his words hit me like a physical blow. He truly believed he was the victim. He had rewritten the narrative in his head so completely that I was the villain for not bankrupting myself to save him from his own greed. He didn't care about the years I spent working overtime. He didn't care about the sacrifices his mother made. He saw us only as a bank that was refusing to dispense cash. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I realized with a chilling clarity that the boy I raised was dead. The fishing trips, the baseball games, the bedtime stories, they were all gone. Standing in front of me was a parasite in a man's skin. He didn't love me. He didn't love Patricia. He only loved what we could provide. And now that the provision was threatened, he hated us. That was the moment the last thread of hope snapped. I had been holding on to a tiny sliver of belief that maybe, just maybe, he was being coerced. That maybe he was just scared. But this was pure, unadulterated entitlement. I walked past him without saying a word. I went into the living room to the antique secretary desk where I kept the emergency household fund. My hands moved mechanically. I opened the hidden drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. It contained $10,000 in cash. It was money I had set aside for a rainy day, for a sudden roof repair or a medical emergency. Well, the storm was here. I walked back to the dining table where Brandon had followed me, still muttering under his breath about how unfair I was. I threw the envelope onto the polished wood surface. It landed with a heavy thud. "There," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "That is $10,000. That is every cent of cash I have in this house." Brandon looked at the envelope, then at me. "10,000?" he scoffed. "That won't even cover the interest, Dad." "Are you joking?" "I am not joking," I said coldly. Take it. Take it and run. Get in your car, drive to the airport, and get on the first plane to anywhere. Disappear. Brandon. Because those men are coming back tomorrow, and I am not going to save you." He stared at me, mouth agape. "You are kicking me out. I am giving you a head start," I corrected him. "I am giving you a chance to survive. Because if you stay here, you are going to jail or you are going to the morgue. I am done. I am done paying for you. I am done protecting you." Brandon reached for the envelope, his hands shaking. He looked at the money, debating whether to take it. I saw the wheels turning in his head. $10,000 could get him far away. It was a coward's way out. But it was a way out. But before his fingers could close around the cash, a hand shot out from the shadows. It was a pale, slender hand with blood-red fingernails. Tiffany. She snatched the envelope off the table with the speed of a viper. "We are not going anywhere," she announced. Her voice was ice-cold, sharp enough to cut glass. She stepped into the light. She looked immaculate, not a hair out of place, her eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. She looked at the money in her hand, sneered, and then looked at Brandon. She raised her hand and slapped him, hard. The sound echoed through the high ceilings of the living room. Brandon stumbled back, clutching his cheek, looking at his wife in shock. "You spineless idiot," Tiffany hissed. "You would run away for 10 grand. You would give up everything for pocket change." "Tiff, he's kicking us out," Brandon whined. "The Russians." "Forget the Russians," Tiffany screamed at him. She turned to me, clutching the money to her chest, her eyes wide with a manic fervor. She dropped the mask completely. There was no more sweet daughter-in-law. There was only a desperate, greedy woman who saw her fortune slipping away. "We do not need to run, Harold," she said, staring me down. "And we do not need your $10,000. That is peanuts." She took a step closer to Brandon, grabbing him by the collar of his shirt and shaking him. "Pull yourself together, Brandon. Think. Use your head for once. We don't need to hide. We just need to wait." "Wait for what?" Brandon stammered. Tiffany smiled, and it was the most grotesque thing I had ever seen. "For nature to take its course," she whispered, but in the silence of the room it sounded like a shout. She pointed a finger toward the ceiling, toward the master bedroom. "We just need the old woman to die tonight. That is all." I stood frozen, my blood turning to slush in my veins. She was saying it. She was saying it out loud. "If she dies tonight," Tiffany continued, her eyes gleaming, "tomorrow morning, we are the grieving family. The autopsy will show respiratory failure. A natural death for a Parkinson's patient. And do you know what happens then?" She turned to look at me, her gaze filled with triumph. "The life insurance policy pays out immediately upon death certification. It is a double indemnity clause for accidental medical complications. $5 million, Harold. $5 million. My breath caught in my throat. 5 million. I thought the policy was for 500,000. I had never taken out a $5 million policy. Then I realized. Tiffany used to handle my paperwork when Patricia first got sick. She had access to the files. She must have forged our signatures. She had increased the premiums and the payout without us ever knowing. She had been planning this for years. This wasn't a desperate reaction to a gambling debt. This was a long-term investment. She was finally cashing in. "We pay the Russians their 2 million, Tiffany said, doing the math in the air with her free hand. "And we walk away with 3 million. Plus the house. Plus your accounts. So no, Harold. We are not taking your $10,000 and running. We are staying right here." She turned back to Brandon, stroking his bruised cheek. "Go wash your face, baby. We have a long night ahead of us. We need to be ready to call 911 and put on a good show when the breathing stops." She looked at me one last time. "Go to bed, old man. Try not to get in the way of destiny." She turned and walked toward the kitchen, tucking my $10,000 into her pocket as if it were a tip. Brandon looked at me, his eyes empty, then turned and followed her like a dog on a leash. I stood alone in the living room. I had heard every word. I had heard the motive. I had heard the plan. And most importantly, I knew the timeline. They weren't waiting for Monday. They were waiting for the next few hours. The mask hadn't just fallen off. It had been smashed to pieces. And beneath it, I finally saw the true face of my enemy. I looked at the clock. It was 11 p.m. It was time to go to war. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight. The deep, resonant chimes vibrated through the floorboards, marking the beginning of Monday. For most of the world, it was just the start of another work week. For me, it was the start of the final countdown. I sat in the darkened living room, the glow of my tablet illuminating my face. The house was silent, but it was the silence of a held breath before a scream. Upstairs, my wife was fighting a chemical war inside her own body. Down the hall, my son and his wife were waiting for her to lose that war. But they had made a critical error in their calculations. They forgot who built this house. I looked down at the tablet in my hands. To Tiffany and Brandon, the smart home features I had installed over the years were just convenient gadgets for turning on lights or playing music. To me, they were a nervous system, and tonight I was waking it up. I opened the developer console on my custom security app. This wasn't the standard interface you get from a store-bought system. This was code I had written myself, a hobby that had turned into an obsession as I got older. I bypassed the standard user protocols and accessed the root command. I initiated the silent lockdown sequence. With a series of soft, barely audible clicks, the magnetic locks on the exterior doors engaged. I disabled the keypad entry from the outside. No one was coming in, and more importantly, no one was getting out. If things went wrong tonight, if I failed, I wanted to make sure they couldn't just run away with the money. They would be trapped here with the consequences. Next, I activated the interior motion sensors. I adjusted the sensitivity to maximum. I wanted to know if a mouse scurried across the floorboards. I linked the sensor data to the cloud server, setting up a redundant backup stream. Tiffany was smart. She knew where the physical hard drive for the cameras was located in the basement. She probably planned to destroy it after the deed was done. But she didn't know about the off-site server I rented in Oregon. Every second of video, every decibel of audio, was being uploaded instantly. There would be no missing footage. There would be no corrupted files. The truth was being etched into the digital stone of the internet, forever beyond her reach. I typed in the final command. Live stream broadcast. Status standby. I set the trigger to my heart rate monitor. If my pulse went above 140 beats per minute, the heart rate of a man in combat, the system would automatically start broadcasting the feed to a private server accessible by the Seattle Police Department and my lawyer. It was a dead man's switch. If they killed me, the evidence would be in the hands of the authorities before my body hit the floor. I set the tablet down on the coffee table. The digital preparations were complete. Now I needed to prepare for the physical reality of violence. I stood up, my knees protesting with a sharp ache, and walked over to the antique bookshelf in the corner. To the casual observer, it was just a collection of engineering encyclopedias and history books. But I reached behind the third volume of the History of Civil Engineering and pressed a small hidden latch. The false panel clicked open. Inside, wrapped in an oil-stained cloth, was my father's Remington shotgun. It was a 12-gauge pump action, a relic from a different time, a tool for hunting deer in the deep woods. I hadn't fired it in 20 years. The last time I used it, I was teaching Brandon how to aim. I remembered the way he flinched at the recoil, the way I had put my hand on his shoulder to steady him. The memory tasted like ash in my mouth. I unwrapped the cloth. The smell of gun oil and old steel filled my nose. It was a heavy, cold scent, the smell of finality. I checked the mechanism. It slid back and forth with a smooth, deadly clack. I didn't want to make noise, so I moved slowly, deliberately. I reached into the box of shells at the bottom of the compartment. The red plastic casings felt cool in my hand. I loaded them one by one. Click, click, click. 3 shells. 1 for the warning, 2 for the defense. I prayed to a God I hadn't spoken to in years that I wouldn't have to use them. But I was done taking chances. I was done being the victim. I walked back to the sofa, carrying the weapon low against my leg. I knelt down and slid the shotgun under the heavy furniture. It vanished into the shadows beneath the skirt of the couch, easily accessible but completely hidden. I sat back down, positioning myself right above it. I could feel its presence through the cushions, a steel spine stiffening my resolve. I checked my watch. 12:15. The house settled. A pipe groaned somewhere in the walls. The wind picked up outside, rattling the window pane. I closed my eyes, visualizing the layout of the upstairs hallway. I imagined the path from the guest room to the master bedroom. It was 20 feet. 20 feet of carpet. 20 feet between my wife and her executioners. I waited. Time seemed to stretch and warp. Minutes felt like hours. I focused on my breathing, keeping my heart rate low, keeping the adrenaline in check. I needed to be sharp. I needed to be ready to act the moment the trap was sprung. Then it happened. My smartwatch buzzed against my wrist. It wasn't a text message. It wasn't an email. It was a sustained rhythmic vibration. The haptic feedback pattern for the upstairs hallway sensor. Motion detected. Zone 2. Master bedroom approach. I snapped my eyes open and looked at the tablet screen. The black and white night vision feed flickered to life. The hallway was gray and grainy, but the figure moving through it was unmistakable. It was Tiffany. She wasn't walking with her usual confident stride. She was creeping, moving on the balls of her feet, trying to be silent. She was wearing her silk pajamas, the ones she thought made her look elegant. But in the ghostly light of the camera, she looked like a phantom. She stopped outside our bedroom door. She looked back toward the stairs, checking the darkness, checking for me. I held my breath, sitting perfectly still in the living room below, watching her, watching for me. She couldn't see me, but I could see the intent in every line of her body. Then I saw what she was carrying. It wasn't a glass of water. It wasn't a medicine bottle. Clutched in her hands, pressed tight against her chest, was a large, fluffy pillow. My heart slammed against my ribs. The poison wasn't working fast enough. Or maybe she just wanted to be sure. Maybe the natural causes narrative needed a little help. She was going to smother Patricia. She was going to press that soft white pillow over my wife's face and hold it there until the struggling stopped. I watched as she reached out and slowly, agonizingly slowly, turned the handle of the bedroom door. The door opened a crack, slicing a beam of darkness into the hallway. She slipped inside the pillow, raised like a weapon. I didn't think. I didn't calculate. The engineer vanished and the husband took over. I launched myself off the sofa, my hand diving underneath to grab the cold steel of the shotgun. I pumped the slide. The sound was loud, mechanical, and terrifyingly violent in the quiet house. Clack, clack. I wasn't the prey anymore. I was the one knocking at the door. I turned toward the stairs and began to run. The 20 feet of hallway felt like 20 miles. My lungs burned not from exertion, but from the sheer suffocating panic of knowing that every microsecond counted. I didn't just hear the silence of the house anymore. I heard the phantom sound of my wife gasping for air beneath a wall of feathers. I reached the top of the stairs, my momentum carrying me forward like a freight train. I skidded to a halt just outside the master bedroom door. The door was ajar, a sliver of darkness cutting through the dim light of the hallway. Through that crack I saw it, the image that will haunt me until my dying day. Tiffany was leaning over the bed. She wasn't checking a pulse. She wasn't adjusting a blanket. She was putting her entire body weight onto a king-sized down pillow, pressing it down over Patricia's face. My wife's arms were pinned at her sides by the sheets, but I could see her legs thrashing feebly under the comforter, a desperate, silent struggle for survival. The rage that exploded in my chest was blinding. It wasn't the cold calculation of the engineer anymore. It was the primal roar of a protector. I didn't think about the plan. I didn't think about the camera. I just reacted. I slammed the door open with my shoulder, the wood cracking against the wall with a sound like a gunshot. "Get away from her!" My voice tore through the room, raw and thunderous. Tiffany jumped as if she had been electrocuted. She snatched the pillow away from Patricia's face, clutching it to her chest like a shield. She spun around, her eyes wide with shock, her chest heaving. For a split second, I saw the truth on her face, the pure, unadulterated guilt of a killer caught in the act. But Tiffany was a chameleon. In the blink of an eye, the mask slammed back into place. Her features softened. Her posture slumped into a performance of exhaustion and concern. "Dad," she gasped, her voice trembling with fake adrenaline. "You scared me. Keep your voice down." I stepped into the room, my hands shaking, not with fear, but with the urge to strangle her. I looked at Patricia. My wife was gasping, taking in great ragged gulps of air. Her face was flushed sweat matting her gray hair to her forehead. She was alive, but barely. "What were you doing?" I growled, taking a step toward Tiffany. "You were smothering her. I saw you." Tiffany took a step back, raising the pillow defensively. "Are you crazy, smothering her?" Harold, look at her. She was choking on her own saliva. She couldn't breathe. I was trying to prop her head up with the pillow to open her airway. "I saved her life." "Liar!" I screamed, pointing a trembling finger at her. "You were pressing it down. You were killing her!" "You are confused!" Tiffany shouted back, her voice gaining that sharp, manipulative edge. "You are seeing things, Harold, just like you were confused about the pills. You are hysterical." She was doing it again, twisting reality, making me the villain in my own tragedy. But this time I wasn't buying it. I looked around for a weapon. I had left the shotgun in the hallway hidden behind the linen closet door as a backup, realizing that bringing a firearm into a struggle might result in an accidental discharge that could hit Patricia. I needed something blunt, something immediate. My eyes landed on the corner of the room near the wardrobe. My old aluminum baseball bat. I kept it there for security, a habit from years ago. I lunged for it. My fingers closed around the cold metal grip. It felt solid, real. I turned back to Tiffany, raising the bat. "Get out," I warned, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. "Get out of this house before I break your legs." Tiffany's eyes widened. She saw the bat. She saw the look in my eyes. She knew the game of words was over. She opened her mouth to scream, but before she could, heavy footsteps thundered into the room behind me. It was Brandon. He must have been listening from the guest room, waiting for the signal that the deed was done. Instead, he heard his wife screaming, "Dad! Stop!" Brandon rushed in, his eyes, darting from Tiffany cowering by the bed to me standing there with a baseball weapon. He didn't see a father protecting his mother. He saw a violent old man threatening his wife. "She tried to kill your mother," I yelled at him, not lowering the bat. "She had the pillow over her face." "He's lying, Brandon," Tiffany shrieked, pointing at me. "He's gone crazy. He came in here screaming and grabbed the bat. He's going to kill me. He's having a psychotic break." Brandon looked at me, then at Tiffany. The choice was instantaneous. He chose the lie. He chose the woman who held the keys to his debt. "Put the bat down, Dad," Brandon said, stepping between us. He held his hands up, palms out, but his body was coiled for violence. "Put it down now." "Look at your mother, Brandon," I pleaded, gesturing to Patricia, who was still wheezing on the bed, tears streaming down her face. "Look at her. Does she look like she was being helped?" Brandon refused to look at the bed. He kept his eyes locked on me. I said, "Put it down." He lunged. It happened so fast. One moment he was standing 5 feet away, the next he was on me. I tried to swing the bat, but not to hit him. I couldn't bring myself to crack my own son's skull. I hesitated. That hesitation was my undoing. Brandon grabbed the barrel of the bat with both hands. He was 35, desperate and fueled by adrenaline. I was 70, tired and heartbroken. He wrenched the bat sideways, twisting my wrists painfully. "Let go," he grunted, shoving me backward. I lost my grip on the bat. The force of his shove sent me reeling. My feet tangled in the thick Persian rug. I flailed, reaching out for something to break my fall, but there was nothing but air. I fell backward hard. The back of my head slammed into the sharp mahogany corner of the nightstand. A blinding flash of white light exploded behind my eyes. Then a sickening crack echoed through the room. I hit the floor. The world spun violently. Pain, hot and searing, radiated from my skull down my neck. I tried to lift my head, but my body wouldn't obey. A warm, wet sensation began to spread through my hair, pooling quickly on the hardwood floor. Blood. "Oh my God," Brandon whispered. My vision blurred. I saw Brandon standing over me, the bat hanging loosely in his hand. He looked horrified. "What did you do?" Tiffany asked. Her voice wasn't scared anymore. It was cold, calculating. I pushed him," Brandon stammered. "He fell. Is he dead?" I wanted to speak. I wanted to tell them I was alive. But a wave of darkness washed over me, heavy and irresistible. I couldn't move my arms. I couldn't open my mouth. I just lay there, staring up at the ceiling, watching the room dim, as if someone were slowly turning down a dimmer switch. Tiffany walked into my field of vision. She looked down at me. She didn't check my pulse. She didn't call for help. She nudged my leg with her foot. "It doesn't matter," she said softly. "This makes it easier. 2 accidents in one night. A tragedy." I saw her turn back toward the bed, toward Patricia. "Finish it," she told Brandon. "I'll handle the old man." I tried to scream, but only a silent darkness came out. I lay motionless, bleeding out on the floor of the bedroom I had built, forced to watch the final act of their betrayal through eyes that were rapidly glazing over. The trap had backfired. I was down, and my wife was alone. The darkness that swallowed me was not peaceful. It was a swirling, nauseating vortex of pain, centered right at the base of my skull. I felt the cold hardness of the wooden floor against my cheek, and the sticky warmth of my own blood pooling around my ear. I wanted to drift away. I wanted to let the blackness take me, because the reality of what had just happened was too heavy to bear. My own son had raised his hands against me. He had chosen her. He had chosen the money. But I could not fade away. Not yet. Through the ringing in my ears, I could hear them. Their voices sounded distant, distorted, as if they were speaking underwater, but I forced my brain to focus, to latch onto the words. I had to know if I was dying. I had to know if my wife was next. "I killed him. Oh God, Tiffany, I killed him." It was Brandon. He sounded like a child, hyperventilating, his breath coming in short, jagged gasps. I felt hands on my body, shaking hands. He was grabbing my shoulder, trying to turn me over, but he was too weak, too panicked to get a grip. "Don't touch him," Tiffany's voice was a whip crack in the room. "Leave him exactly where he is." "But he is not moving," Brandon cried out. He scrambled closer, and I felt 2 trembling fingers press against the side of my neck. I forced myself to remain limp. I forced my breathing to be shallow, barely moving my chest. I had to play dead to save the living. "There is a pulse," Brandon whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of relief and terror. "It is weak, but it is there. He is alive, Tiff. We have to call an ambulance. Maybe he just has a concussion. If we call now, we can say he slipped on the rug. We can fix this." I waited for the agreement. I waited for the tiny sliver of humanity to show itself in my daughter-in-law. Instead, I heard a sigh. It was a long, exasperated sound, the sound of a parent disappointed in a slow child. "You are so stupid," Tiffany said. Her voice had changed. It was no longer shrill or panicked. It was terrifyingly calm. It was the voice of a surgeon deciding where to cut. "Look at him. He is 70 years old. He hit his head on solid mahogany. Even if he wakes up, he saw everything. He knows about the pills. He knows about the pillow. If he wakes up, you go to prison for assault and attempted murder. I go to prison as an accomplice. Is that what you want? Do you want to be locked in a cage with the kind of men you owe money to? I heard Brandon shuffle backward, the floorboards creaking. No, he whispered. No, please. Then stop talking about ambulances, Tiffany commanded. This is not a problem, Brandon. This is a gift. This is the solution we have been praying for. What do you mean? Brandon asked. Tiffany walked around my body. I could hear her footsteps slow and deliberate. She stopped near my head. I could smell the metallic tang of blood mixing with her expensive perfume. Think about the narrative, she said softly. It is perfect. The tragedy of the Sullivan family. The devoted husband, exhausted and confused, tries to help his sick wife in the middle of the night. He slips. He falls. He hits his head. A tragic fatal accident. She paused, letting the image sink in. And the wife, the poor invalid wife, sees the love of her life die right in front of her. The shock is too much. Her heart, already weakened by her condition, gives out. She dies of a broken heart. It is poetic, Brandon. The police will eat it up. The insurance company will pay out double for the accidental death of your father. We don't just clear the debt. We walk away with everything. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with blood loss. She was improvising a double homicide on the spot. She wasn't just evil. She was efficient. But Mom is still alive, Brandon stammered. She is just watching us. I fought the urge to open my eyes. I knew Patricia was there, paralyzed on the bed, unable to scream, unable to look away. She was watching her husband bleed out while her daughter-in-law planned her execution. The thought of her terror gave me a surge of adrenaline that cleared the fog in my brain. Not for long, Tiffany said. I heard the rustle of fabric. She was moving back toward the bed. She is already halfway there. Tiffany continued, her voice moving away from me. The drugs have slowed her heart. The shock of seeing you attack your father probably did the rest. I am just going to help her along. It will be quick. A little pressure on the carotid artery. It leaves less evidence than the pillow. It will look like cardiac arrest. Tiff, don't, Brandon pleaded, but his voice was weak. He was broken. He was standing there, letting it happen. Turn around, Brandon, Tiffany said soothingly. If you can't watch, just turn around. Go look out the window. Watch for the police. Let me handle the dirty work. I am doing this for us. I am doing this for your fingers. Do you want to keep your fingers? There was a silence. Then the sound of Brandon walking away. He walked to the window. He turned his back on his mother. I was the only one left. I was the only thing standing between Patricia and death. I tried to summon the strength to move. I tried to command my legs to stand up, but my body felt disconnected. The blow to my head had scrambled my motor functions. I twitched my fingers, scratching the wood floor, but I couldn't lift my torso. I was trapped in a prison of flesh, forced to listen as the killer approached the bed. I heard Patricia make a sound. It was a high, thin whine trapped in her throat. It was the sound of a woman begging for her life. Shh, Patricia, Tiffany whispered. It is okay. You are going to a better place. You are going to be with Harold. He is waiting for you. Just close your eyes. It is time to sleep. I heard the mattress creak as Tiffany leaned over. I could imagine her hands, those manicured hands, reaching out for my wife's throat. I strained every muscle, screaming internally, trying to force my adrenaline to override the concussion. My heart slammed against my ribs like a trapped bird. Thump, thump, thump. It was beating so fast it felt like it was going to explode. 140, 150, 160, and then the house answered me. It started with a low hum, followed by a sharp digital chime that echoed from every corner of the room, from the hallway, from the living room downstairs. It was the sound of the smart home system waking up from its silent vigil. The lights in the bedroom, which had been dim, suddenly flashed bright red, then white, then red again. A pulsing emergency beacon. Tiffany gasped and jumped back from the bed. "What the hell?" Brandon spun around from the window. "What did you do?" Then the voice filled the room. It wasn't the soft, polite voice of the virtual assistant we used to check the weather. It was a cold, synthesized masculine voice, the voice of authority, the voice I had programmed for the worst-case scenario. Warning. Biometric anomaly detected. User Harold Sullivan. Heart rate critical. 165 beats per minute. Trauma pattern identified. Tiffany looked around wildly, her eyes wide with confusion. "Turn it off, Brandon, turn it off!" She didn't understand. She couldn't turn it off. The system wasn't just reacting, it was executing a protocol. The voice continued louder this time, drowning out Brandon's panicked whimpering. Emergency protocol Alpha initiated, silent alarm disabled, active broadcast engaged, live audio and video feed established with Seattle Emergency Dispatch and cloud server backup. Tiffany froze. Her face went white. "Live feed." Location confirmed, the robot voice announced relentlessly. 1942 Lakeview Drive. Situation: domestic disturbance. Possible homicide in progress. Police units have been notified. Estimated time of arrival, 3 minutes. 3 minutes. The words hung in the air like a physical barrier. Tiffany looked at the ceiling, looking for the camera she couldn't see. She looked at Brandon, who was sliding down the wall in terror. And then slowly she looked down at me. My eyes were open. I wasn't playing dead anymore. I was looking right at her, and even through the blood and the pain, I managed to curl my lip into a smile. "I told you." I rasped, my voice weak but audible in the sudden silence between the sirens that were beginning to wail in the distance. "I told you I wasn't senile." Tiffany stared at me, the blood draining from her face until she looked like a wax figure. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. The camera wasn't just recording, it was broadcasting. The police weren't just coming. They were already watching. Every word she had said about staging the accident, every threat, every step she took toward Patricia. It was all gone. It was all out there. She backed away from the bed, her hands trembling uncontrollably. "No," she whispered. "No, this isn't real." "Run," Brandon said, his voice a ghost of a sound. "Run, Tiff." But there was nowhere to run. The red lights pulsed around us, bathing the room in the color of emergency, the color of blood, the color of the end. And through the open window, the sound of sirens grew louder, a rising tide that was coming to wash the scum away. The room was a chaotic storm of flashing red lights and the relentless monotone voice of the security system announcing the arrival of the authorities. Tiffany was unraveling before my eyes. For the first time, her composure cracked completely. She was no longer the mastermind. She was a frantic animal trapped in a cage of her own making. She lunged at the smart speaker on the nightstand, clawing at the cord, ripping it from the wall with a shower of sparks. She threw the device against the floor, shattering the plastic casing. "Shut up," she screamed, her voice shrill and breaking. "Shut it off, Brandon. Find the main breaker. Kill the power." But the voice did not stop. It continued from the hallway speakers, from the ceiling-mounted units, echoing through the house like the voice of judgment itself. Connection lost. Switching to backup battery power. Broadcast signal remains strong. Police units are 2 minutes out. Tiffany spun around, her eyes wild, scanning the room for anything else she could destroy, anything she could silence. She looked at the smoke detector, at the motion sensors in the corners. She grabbed a heavy glass vase from the dresser and hurled it at the ceiling, missing the sensor by inches. It crashed against the wall, sending shards of glass raining down onto the carpet. "It is in the cloud, you idiot," I thought, though my mouth was too dry to speak the words yet. You cannot break the cloud with a vase. I used her distraction to move. The pain in my head was blinding, a white-hot spike that drove into my skull with every beat of my heart, but I pushed it aside. I compartmentalized it just like I used to compartmentalize the freezing cold on a winter job site. I rolled onto my stomach, my muscles screaming in protest. I tasted copper in my mouth. Blood. My blood. It dripped from my forehead, staining the hardwood floor, but I did not stop. I dragged myself toward the bed, not to the side where Patricia lay, but to the foot of the bed. Tiffany was too busy screaming at Brandon to notice. Brandon was pressed against the wall, sobbing, his hands covering his ears, trying to block out the siren song of the security system. My hand reached under the heavy oak frame of the bed. My fingers brushed against the dust ruffle, searching, grasping. And then I felt it. The cold, smooth wood of the stock. The solid steel of the barrel. I had taped a backup shotgun, a sawed-off Remington, to the slats of the bed frame 3 years ago, after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood. I had forgotten about it until tonight. Tonight, I remembered everything. I ripped the gun free from the duct tape. The sound of the adhesive tearing was lost in the chaos of the room. I gripped the weapon, feeling its weight anchor me to the earth. It was loaded. It was ready. And so was I. I used the bedpost to pull myself up. My legs were shaky, wobbling like a newborn colt's, but I locked my knees. I wiped the blood from my eyes with the back of my sleeve, smearing a dark crimson streak across my face. I must have looked like a demon rising from the underworld. A battered, bleeding, angry old man who refused to stay down. I pumped the shotgun. Clack, clack. The sound cut through the noise of the alarm like a thunderclap. It was a universal sound, a sound that commanded instant, terrified silence. Tiffany froze. She slowly turned around, her hands still raised in the air from her tantrum. Her eyes went from the broken speaker on the floor to the barrel of the 12-gauge pointed directly at her chest. Brandon stopped crying. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, staring at me with his mouth open. "Step away from my wife," I growled. My voice was low, gravelly, and filled with a cold, hard promise. Tiffany stared at the gun. She blinked her brain, trying to process this new variable. She looked at my face, searching for the weak old man she had bullied for years. She didn't find him. She found Harold Sullivan, the man who moved mountains of steel and concrete. "You won't shoot," she said. Her voice was trembling, but she tried to inject that familiar arrogance into it. She tried to summon the manipulator one last time. "You don't have the guts, Harold. You are a churchgoer. You are a good citizen. If you pull that trigger, you go to prison for the rest of your life. You will die in a cell." I took a step forward. The floorboards creaked under my boots. The red light of the alarm washed over us, turning the scene into a macabre tableau. "I am already in hell, Tiffany," I said. "Do you think I care about a prison cell? You tried to kill Patricia. You tried to kill me. The only reason you are still standing is because I want you to hear the sirens coming for you." Tiffany laughed, a hysterical, jagged sound. "There are no sirens, Harold. It is just your stupid machine making noise. You are bluffing. You are just a pathetic old man with a toy." She took a step toward me. She was gambling. She was betting her life on the idea that I was too civilized to put a hole in her chest. "Shoot me then," she screamed, spreading her arms wide, challenging me. "Go ahead. Shoot me, make yourself a murderer, then Brandon gets everything anyway." I didn't flinch. I didn't lower the gun. But I didn't fire. I didn't need to. I had a weapon far more powerful than gunpowder. I took my left hand off the pump and pointed a single blood-stained finger toward the ornate crystal chandelier hanging above the bed. Hidden among the crystals, blinking with a tiny rhythmic blue light that was almost invisible against the glare, was the high-definition, wide-angle lens I had installed last Christmas to monitor Patricia's sleep apnea. Tiffany followed my finger. She squinted, looking at the light. "Say hello to the audience, daughter-in-law," I said, my voice cutting through the room with deadly precision. Tiffany looked back at me, confused. "What, you aren't just arguing with me, Tiffany?" I continued, a grim smile touching my lips. "That camera is live. It is broadcasting to my private Facebook feed. It is broadcasting to the cloud. And right now, according to the notification I got on my watch before I hit the floor, there are over 5,000 people watching you." Tiffany's face went slack. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. 5,000 witnesses," I said, savoring every syllable. "They saw you with the pillow. They heard you tell Brandon to let me die. They heard you plan the insurance fraud. They heard it all. My lawyer is watching. The neighbors are watching. And I am willing to bet the police dispatchers are watching too." Tiffany looked at the camera, then back at me. The arrogance evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, terrified shell. She realized that she couldn't talk her way out of this. She couldn't gaslight 5,000 people. The narrative she had carefully constructed about the senile father and the tragic accident had just been broadcast as a cold-blooded murder plot to the entire world. "No," she whispered. "No, you are lying. Check your phone," I said. "Go ahead. Check the live stream. See the comments. They are calling for your head, Tiffany." She didn't move. She couldn't move. The weight of the exposure crushed her. She collapsed to her knees, not in prayer, but in defeat. She covered her face with her hands, trying to hide from the unblinking eye of the camera, trying to hide from the truth. Brandon looked at his wife, then at the camera. He curled into a ball, hiding his face in his knees, sobbing quietly. I kept the gun trained on them, but I lowered the barrel slightly. I had won. I didn't need to pull the trigger. I had destroyed them with the truth. And then, cutting through the synthesized voice of the alarm, cutting through the sound of Brandon's weeping, came the sound I had been waiting for. Wail, wail, wail. It started faint, a distant cry in the night, but it grew louder with every second. The rising and falling scream of sirens. Not one, not two, but a fleet of them. They were turning onto our street. The cavalry had arrived. The blue lights would be dancing on the front lawn in seconds. I looked at Patricia. She was still paralyzed, but her eyes were open. She was looking at me, and in the midst of the chaos beneath the red flashing lights, I saw a tear slide down her cheek. I winked at her. "Hang on, Patty," I whispered. "The cleanup crew is here." The flashing blue lights that flooded the bedroom were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. They cut through the red haze of the emergency alarm, washing away the darkness that had almost consumed my family. I did not move from my spot at the foot of the bed. I kept the shotgun pointed at the floor, my finger off the trigger, waiting for the officers to secure the room. When they burst through the door, weapons drawn, shouting commands, I calmly placed my gun on the floor and raised my hands. I was not the threat. I was the survivor. The next 20 minutes were a blur of organized chaos. Paramedics rushed past me to get to Patricia. I watched as they stabilized her, checking her vitals. Their professional urgency, a stark contrast to Tiffany's calculated cruelty. Tiffany was still trying to act the part of the outraged homeowner, screaming about her rights, screaming that I was crazy, but the police were not listening. One officer, a young man with a grim face, had already watched the playback on his tablet from the cloud server. He had seen the pillow. He had heard the confession. He approached Tiffany not with a notepad, but with a pair of steel handcuffs. When the cold metal clicked around Tiffany's wrists, she stopped screaming. She went rigid, her eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit that did not exist. Brandon did not even fight. He held his hands out willingly, his head hanging low, tears streaming down his face onto his ruined designer shirt. They were led out of the bedroom, past the bed where my wife was finally breathing steady oxygen from a mask. I followed them downstairs. I had to. There was one last thing I needed to do. One last structural failure I needed to point out, before the demolition was complete. They were standing by the patrol cars in the driveway. The rain had started again, a light drizzle that slicked the pavement where Patricia's blue orchid lay shattered. Tiffany was being shoved into the back of one cruiser, while Brandon was being patted down against the hood of another. I walked up to him. The officer moved to stop me, but I held up a hand. "I just need a moment with my son," I said. My voice was raspy. My head was throbbing, but I stood tall. The officer nodded and took a half step back. Brandon looked at me. His eyes were red, swollen, and filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. He looked at the bandage the paramedics had slapped onto my forehead. "Dad," he whimpered. "I am sorry. I didn't want to do it. Tiffany made me. The Russians. They were going to hurt me." I looked at him and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a hollow space where my love for him used to be. "It doesn't matter, Brandon," I said softly. "It is over. But before you go, there is something you need to know, something that makes this whole night even more tragic for you." He looked at me, sniffing. "What, you did this for the money," I said. "You tried to kill your mother and frame me because you thought you would inherit the house and the insurance. You thought this property was your golden ticket out of debt." "Yes," he whispered, shame coloring his cheeks. "Tiffany said the house alone was worth $1 million. I leaned in close, so close I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. I wanted Tiffany to hear this too. I raised my voice just enough so it would carry to the open window of the cruiser where she sat. "You should have asked me about my finances, son," I said. "I sold this house 5 years ago." Brandon frowned. "What? No, you didn't. We are standing in it." "I signed a reverse mortgage, Brandon," I said, savoring the look of confusion spreading across his face. "Do you know what that is? It means the bank pays me a monthly income based on the value of the home. I used that money to pay for your mother's best-in-class medical treatments. I used it to buy the smart home system that just caught you." I pointed at the sprawling estate behind me. "I don't own this house anymore, Brandon. The bank does. The contract states that upon the death of the last resident, the keys go back to the lender. There is no equity. There is no inheritance. If you had succeeded in killing us tonight, do you know what you would have inherited?" I paused, letting the silence of the rainy night amplify my words. "Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You would have inherited a pile of paperwork and my funeral bill. You destroyed your life, you murdered your soul, and you are going to prison for $0 and 0 cents. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His knees buckled, and he would have collapsed if the officer hadn't held him up. His mouth opened in a silent scream of pure, agonizing despair. It wasn't the despair of a man who regrets his crimes. It was the despair of a gambler who realizes he bet everything on a horse that was already dead. From the back of the patrol car, a shriek pierced the night. It was Tiffany. She had heard me. She was thrashing against the window, her face twisted into a mask of pure demonic fury. "You lying old man!" she screamed, her voice muffled by the glass. "You broke, useless old man!" Then she turned her rage on Brandon. I could hear her even through the closed door. "You idiot! You told me he was rich. You told me we would be set for life. I killed for nothing. You are useless. I hate you." Brandon sobbed, his body shaking uncontrollably as the officer guided him into the car. He looked at me one last time through the window, begging for a salvation I could no longer give. I watched as the cars pulled away, their red taillights fading into the wet darkness of the street. They took my son away. They took the monsters away. I turned back to my house. It was empty now. The door was broken. The floor was stained with blood. But as I walked up the steps, I took a deep breath of the cool night air. The air tasted clean. 6 months have passed since that night. The seasons have changed. and the rain has turned to the soft, golden light of early summer. I am sitting on a bench overlooking the Oregon coast, watching the waves crash against the jagged rocks below. The salt spray misting my face feels like a baptism washing away the lingering grime of betrayal. Next to me sits Patricia. She is in her wheelchair, a blanket tucked around her legs. She is thinner now, and the Parkinson's has progressed as we always knew it would. But she is alive. She is smiling. She is pointing at a seagull diving for a fish, her hand trembling, but her eyes bright with awareness. We sold the furniture. We let the bank take the house early. We took what little savings we had left and moved to this small assisted living community by the sea. It is not a mansion. It is a small 2-room apartment. But it is safe, and it is ours. I spend my days reading to her and watching the ocean. I don't think about Brandon much anymore. The lawyers tell me he is facing 20 years. Tiffany is looking at life without parole. They write me letters sometimes. I burn them unopened. I have no space in my life for ghosts. People tell me I am a hero for saving my wife. I don't feel like a hero. I feel like a man who woke up just in time. I look at the families walking on the beach, parents holding their children's hands, and I wonder which of them are building bridges and which of them are digging graves. I used to believe that blood was the strongest bond on earth. I used to believe that family was a sanctuary that could never be breached. I was wrong. Family is not defined by DNA. It is defined by behavior. It is defined by respect. And sometimes the most dangerous people in your world are the ones sitting at your dinner table. I reach out and take Patricia's hand. She squeezes back a weak but steady pressure. That squeeze is worth more than the $2 million Brandon wanted. It is the only inheritance I need. If you are listening to this and you have parents who are getting older, call them. Not to ask for money, not to ask for favors, just to tell them you love them. And if you are a parent, if you have built a kingdom for your children, do me a favor. Check your locks, check your accounts, and maybe, just maybe, install a camera in the living room. Because blind love is a beautiful thing in poetry, but in the real world it can get you killed. Keep your eyes open. The most painful lesson I learned is that the people we carry on our shoulders are often the ones best positioned to cut our throats. We spend our lives building safety nets for our children, never imagining they might use the ropes to bind us. True wisdom isn't just about providing for your family. It is about protecting yourself enough to ensure you survive them. Do not let your legacy become your liability. If this story made you look at your own safety differently, please hit the like button and share it with someone you care about. It might just save a life. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to cut off a toxic family member to save yourself? I want to hear your story. Subscribe for more truth, and remember, I am reading every single comment. Stay safe out there.